Joe committed those better to stand out from the crowd as a go-to expert in your field. Each week, Rich Bontrager interviews top leaders, influencers, authors, speakers, podcasters, and media professionals about how to leverage media best to help you shine brighter on camera and stage as a go-to expert. Now, here's your host, The Trigger, Rich Bontrager.
Thank you once again, Dan, and it's great to be back once again on How to Rock the Stage. It's Wednesday night live, and hey, it's 7 o'clock. We've got a show to do. We're going back to Hollywood again tonight. We're going to get into an area that's actually very interesting because we go to the movies, we get our popcorn, we sit down, and we watch an amazing film, and we get lost in those films. But often you may have heard this, there's amazing film and footage get lost on the editing floor. Films are often 4 hours long before they get cut down, trimmed down. There's different parts to be assembled. You hear about the director, you hear about the writer, you hear about the producer. And maybe if you're a film geek, you pay attention to who the editors are. Tonight, we're going to get into the world of editing. We're going to go inside the editing room tonight. 20 years of experience our guest has in this area and some amazing stories and adventures. But we're getting into storytelling. How do you take someone else's film, their acting, and turn it into the masterpiece that we go pay big bucks for? Stick around tonight. You're in for a great treat. By the way, we do want to thank our sponsor once again. Audavita Studios is proud sponsor of How to Rock the Stage, and they're going to take this show and they're going to turn it into an audio podcast. Audavita Studios has an experienced team paired with their state-of-the-art remote recording practices, and they bring your message to the market even faster. They work with you to produce your audio books, your podcast series, and they help you distribute it into the marketplace. For more information, to learn more about Audavita, go to audavitastudios.com. That's audavitastudios.com, and we love what they do, so please check them out. But tonight, we are going to go into the editing room, and it's learn where the film magic happens. It does happen in the editing room. And tonight, Brad McLaughlin is going to be our guest. He's been working in Hollywood for over 20 years. He has started out as an intern at The Notebook. Remember The Notebook film? He has now worked with 9 Academy Award-winning nominated editors. In post-production, he's worked closely with directors including Frank Miller, J.J. Abrams, Mike Flanagan, and he has recently won an editor. And he recently won an editor on the Sundance sensation Palm Springs, starring Andy Samberg, as well as From Prada to Nada, The Escort, and the Netflix The Open House. He's been involved with all those projects. We're going to dive into some of that as well. So tonight, give a warm welcome to Bradley McLaughlin. Oh, he was there. There he is. We just edited you out of the show.
Hi. No, it's all good.
Thanks for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here.
As we were talking backstage in the green room, you've had an incredible career. It was like some people jump out and they go, and at age 15, you're working in the movie theater, and eventually you're working at Skywalker Ranch. What's it like to have that rocket ship of a childhood dream actually come true?
Well, when you were talking about it, that's quite a story, isn't it? But it's true. So I haven't really processed it yet myself, but I got my start when I was 15. I got a job at a movie theater, and it was right next to my high school. And one of my things was I didn't really have much TV growing up, so I got to watch movies for free. And it was just an incredible place to be because it was always vibrant and full of life, back when I was growing up. Like I remember the first weekend we had Deep Impact in #1 and He Got Game in #2. And we did $25,000 in concessions the first weekend that I ever worked there. And it was quite an experience. And I worked my way up to manager and then a projectionist. So I learned all about film. And at that point, I was thinking maybe I should go into film.
Okay.
One of the projectionists I worked with, he was going to go to USC for grad school for screenwriting. Because when you see a lot of movies, you start having, you start learning a lot more about people behind the scenes. And I made it a point to try and see every movie at the movie theater. Like whenever something came out, I would be like, all right, I'm just going to go.
Well, plus it's free popcorn. Come on. You never paid for any popcorn.
Nope. You smell like popcorn all the time. So I was in summer camp, and someone that that was my camp counselor, he went to Chapman University. And he was like, they have a really up and coming film program. You should look into it. And so I applied and I got in. And originally I was going to go to University of Washington to be a writer. And so I made a last second decision to switch, and I went to film school. And it was probably the best decision I ever made in my life.
So you go into film school, you already have theater in your mind. And again, if you're like anybody like me going to theater, you already have your own stories in your own head. So do you have any stories already in the cupboard? Do you have anything scribbled down yourself that you would someday like to see come out?
I did. I just moved. So I came across a book, my high school book that I started writing, but I was writing plays in high school because I was in theater, and that was something we did as exercises. But the first thing they did in film school is they give you a camera and they're like, you have to create a story, and so you learn right off the bat. And then basically the great thing about Chapman, you could schedule it so you worked through, basically had schooling 3 days a week. And then the next 4 days you could be out there making movies with people. So it was cool. So, I mean, I tried everything. I originally was thinking about being a cinematographer, and then shooting on film is really hard. And so then I did sound, I did, and eventually I did editing. And editing is what I started doing a lot in college.
So editing, again, we see the credits, we watch the movie, and we don't know what really goes on. We only hear bits and pieces from some directors sometimes. And the magic really happens in the editing room. We heard it cliche, but the directors is usually the producer will poke their head in, but they work very tightly with you because you help weave the story to the finish line, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, basically the way that it usually works is you get all the dailies, you get all the footage they're shooting on set, and this is no matter what level you're in, and you put it together. So you have, whether it's 10 people or 20 people or hundreds and hundreds of people, it goes to editorial, and there's usually only 2 or 3 people working, if that. And so it's a lot of pressure if you think about it. So you get a lot of the footage and then you basically watch it. And some people find it's very tedious. Some people find it's really interesting, but it's also very powerful because you're choosing performances. You're putting things together. You're trying to pace things out. And then later on, the director comes in, and depending on how much time you have and how they like to work, then you sometimes go through it all and do it all over again. sometimes, I don't know. It's all different depending on the situation.
Well, and we've got questions coming out already. By the way, streaming live, multiple channels, and here again.
Okay.
So wherever you're at, drop it in the chat if you could. Daniel, who is with us again tonight, good to have you with us, sir, Daniel. Dan's jumping ahead, but Daniel is asking about that idea of how do you work with that editor's cut? Now, we were talking backstage about it because you have the main film, and often the trend has been the editor comes back in, or the director comes back and says, let's put some of that stuff back in there. So what's it like to work between those two worlds?
Well, it's a little bit interesting because, typically there's an editor's cut and then there's a director's cut. But the editor's cut is usually code for assembly. It basically means that it's your first putting together, everything in the movie. And sometimes, depending on who you're working with, it has sound. Sometimes, sometimes it has music. Sometimes the sound effects are really done in. But, I tend to really like to polish it up because it sells the edit. Because, you don't want people worrying about that stuff. But some directors can see through it all. And they don't want to hear that stuff. They just want to see the raw and make it sure that it plays without music. So for the editor's cut on a feature, it usually takes about a week or 2 longer than when you shoot it. So if you're shooting for 4 weeks, like a feature, that would be then, in like 5+ weeks, you would have a cut, which was your first assembly of the movie.
Right.
And, it's always scary to show it because usually the director is been beat up from production and they're just a shell of themselves, because shooting is really hard. You're trying to make something. It's one of the hardest things you can do is make a movie. You're trying to create this world that doesn't exist. And, no matter what, there's going to be construction. People are going to be doing construction on the day. You're going to have someone sick. You're going to have all this stuff. So you're going through the battlefield in the war that is filmmaking. And then
you're actually reminding me of, again, this is going to date me. Star Trek V. I'm at a Star Trek convention, William Shatner speaking, and he was writer, producer, director. By the way, it was the worst Star Trek film done. Thank you, William Shatner. But he was on stage talking about that very fact of I'm acting, directing, producing, and I've got to get my butt into the edit bay, and I don't know which version of it I'm watching.
Right.
He's literally in the process, in the middle of what you're describing. He admitted, even though I'm here at this convention, I'm getting back on a plane to go back in the edit bay because we're still not done, and I don't remember where we left off. How do you do that? How do you?
I mean, your job as an editor is there's many different things. You know, it's not just being a button pusher and just putting everything together. Your job is to help bring the editor or the director back to life sometimes. You know, ease them into it. You know, keep them on track. And you know, your main job is to make everyone. This is what Alan Heim always says: is your main job is to make everyone look good. So you want to make the cinematographer look good. You want to make the production designer look good. You want to make the actors look good. You want to make the director obviously look good, because all of that stuff he gets blamed for. So, you know, when you show an editor's cut or a first assembly, it's always kind of nerve-wracking. But I always liked, you know, I had a director that once said, you know, it's just like after you watch it, you're like, it's only going to go up from here. You know? Otherwise, we're not doing our job right. You know? So I really always think about that. So, and the more you do it, I mean, it doesn't get necessarily easier, but you understand the situation.
So
you know?
you've been an editor assistant. You cut your teeth with some of the best. Again, Frank Miller and other people, being around those directors, being around with their main editor, shadowing them, watching them. What was it like? And what's that difference between the assistant and the main editor? What's the big difference?
Well, I mean, your job as an assistant is to have everything organized, you know, now that we're in the digital age, and even on film, to have everything organized and to know where everything is. Like, you pretty much should have a memorization of all the footage. So you watch it, you get it all ready to go. You know, it helps having a really good memory. But then, you know, the reason why I went into editing is I worked on a documentary, an ACE documentary about editing called The Cutting Edge. And there's a clip in there where Tarantino is talking with his editor, Sally Mendick. And they're like, I spend more time with the director than I spend with my husband.
Wow.
Like and at that point, as I'm trying to figure out what I want to do in Hollywood, I'm like, I want to spend the most time that I can with the director.
Yeah.
And so you do work generally very closely with the director. Like, so you're watching dailies with the director. You know, good editors want their assistants in the room with them so that everyone's on the same page, because communication needs to be, you know, and you can also making notes sometimes on like what take does he like and why does he like it, and what, you know.
Well, and Dan's picking up on our train of thought right here. Dan wants to know, do you have to go to the director when you see something and you know that jump, that move, that ever can't really be done smoothly? Do you have to call a timeout and say, I know we wanted to jump here and cut here, but we got to find another way to do it. This doesn't work. And you have to run by the director, right?
Yeah. A lot of times, you listen to the note, and sometimes you're like, yeah, that can't be done. Or there's just something where you just filmed it this way and you cut off the camera, and then, you restarted it, and, he's already set down the knife. Like, I mean, those are little things. I mean, really good editors, you can always get away from that with like getting on a close up or something. But sometimes, or the main thing that you'll always get is a director being like, I know I got that shot. Like, where's that shot? Like, we shot this thing of this helicopter. And it's just like, I'm looking at everything and I'm like, I haven't seen this helicopter. What are you talking about?
It was the other movie you did.
And then, it's like you look at all the dailies and you do everything. And, it's just like you're really trying to find, where the shot is. And, that happens like at least once every 2 movies. So it's like this phantom shot.
One of the films I want to talk about is The Spirit. It is an older film. It's a comic book film. Frank Miller is a great comic book writer. He's done the Batmans and everything else. But Frank Miller, from what the reputation is, can be difficult to work with. But you worked really close with Frank Miller during The Spirit, right? So what's it like?
Yeah, I worked with him
like that.
I worked with him for about 9 months on The Spirit. And I didn't really get that. I mean, we went in with the idea that basically, just make Frank happy was kind of our note that we got, because he hadn't been basically, to be quite frank, they let go of the other editing crew, and then they hired a new one in the middle of production. Yeah. And me, I was young. That was like my second union movie ever. And I was just like, I get to work for like a comic book god.
Yeah.
And we didn't really have an issue at all with like Frank being difficult. I mean, he would come in and we would eat lunch with him every day. And he just knew what he wanted. He storyboarded the entire movie out. Like, I had to make copies of everything that he storyboarded, and it was great. Like, I'm just like, these are Frank Miller originals.
I was going to ask you about that, because the storyboarding process has got to make it easy for you to get inside the director's mind, to jump into the story. So that's got to be huge to have that. And again, from Frank, that's got to be huge.
Yeah, I mean, the difficulties in that movie were just more the VFX, to be quite honest. Like, I mean, every shot is almost a VFX shot, and kind of organizing and managing all that. But putting it together with Frank was never really an issue at all.
Yeah. What is that symbiotic? Because every director is a little bit different. Some of them want input. Some of them are more, I have my vision and this is going to be the vision. Some of them work better with producer. But what's it like to be in that room? The room is closed. You're starting to go through it. Do you both get that one brain, that one thought, or do you each have your own freedom?
Usually when things are going well, and this is on just about any movie, you're thinking the same way, because your main goal is to make the script sing, and to, you're telling a story. And so by that point, you've seen all the footage and you're understanding how it looks, and you're understanding kind of the tone that you're trying to get. So usually there's not a lot of squabbling between, just like, someone might be like, I really like this one take. I remember this person smiling, and you're like, okay. And then you go take a look at it, and then you're like, okay, we can put it in, or does that really fit the scene? Like, you kind of talk about it, and you just go through scene by scene, and you just kind of like make everything work so that everyone's happy. But then I think also one of the things that I think directors start learning how hard editing is very quickly. And so there are different types of directors too, where they're like, I'm just going to trust you. Like, they kind of got ADD. There's some directors that like, being around a lot of people and stuff. And then they've gone from this whole chaotic, shoot to, oh, I'm just in a room with this person and we're tediously going through, and you're just like looking at every frame. Like, so sometimes they'll be like, I'll just give you notes. Like I'll come in twice a week and give you notes, and you guys can kind of go keep moving forward.
So they do give you freedom. They give you freedom sometimes to say, I trust you, I know you, help me do this, versus,
yeah,
I'm going to sit here and I'm not going to move until this baby's done.
I mean, it really depends. I mean, most of the situations I've been in, there is some freedom. There is, and also directors are busy doing other things, whether it's promoting the movie or trying to get their next one off the ground. So there is a lot of leeway, I found. Mm-hmm. Where it's just like, okay, as long as we're on the same page, like, that's the main thing, is that they can trust you to put it together, and then they're going to go fight for more money so they can get a full orchestra for for scoring. Really, the real pulling teeth on every movie, which is, is cutting it down. So it's less of, putting it all together. It's like, once you have it, like, we need to cut it down. And then they're like, well, I don't want to take that out. I like that line or that one thing, or like, that's, and you're like, we need to cut out 30 minutes of the movie.
Right. That's what Dan's asking now. Dan wants to know, you've got the writer. Often the writer is different than the director. The writer's fighting for their story that they wrote. The director is going for the vision of bringing the story to life. You're in the middle. And how do you cut those 30 minutes?
Well, it's interesting, because a lot of the time the writer, might come by once during post, but they're not as much involved. So it really is, it's the producer and the director. So the producer becomes kind of we need to get this movie, like, they'll watch it, basically the way that it works is like, a director will work really hard with you to get a cut of the movie, and and then you show it to the producer, and the producer will be like, oh, that's long, this has to go, it's really fat around the edges here and there. And then, I think at some point the director's just like, I just worked really hard. And meanwhile, the editor's just like, yeah, I've been working hard and working overtime too. But it really is cutting it down and making it feel, making it smooth. And almost every movie, the first act, you want to try and get it, cut down as much as possible, because the inciting incident you really want in the first 12 or 15 minutes as opposed to 30 pages in the script.
Well, and with that, I do want to pick out one of the things you've been involved with is the Netflix film, the Sundance Award-winning Palm Springs. And for those that know Palm Springs, you need to check this out. But it's an ACE for the best feature editing in a comedy in 2021. Tell us a little bit about that experience, because Netflix is exploding, new original streaming content is exploding. You take it to Sundance and you walk away with an ace.
Yeah. So basically, for that situation, it's a Hulu movie. Hulu ended up buying all the rights to that.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yeah. And that situation, honestly, we were trying to get it into Sundance. I remember sending it off to the Sundance deadline. And personally, I was kind of like, I don't think this is a Sundance movie, because it's kind of, for people that haven't seen it, it's a comedy, kind of like Groundhog's Day, but kind of at a wedding. It's a very, very wonderful film, and something I'm very proud of being a part of. But it was funny because that was right when the pandemic was hitting. Like, they literally played Sundance, and then, a month later, the pandemic set in. And part of the reason why people think the movie did so well and was so popular is because it kind of mimicked everyone's day-to-day life of being stuck inside. So it was great. But the thing about that movie is there were different versions of it. And, somewhere in there, this was kind of like the one that everyone settled on. We test screened that movie probably 8 times, I think 7 or 8 times. We tried a bunch of different openings. I mean, it's a time travel movie, so you can kind of not a time travel movie, but it's kind of like a reoccurring movie.
It's
so
an out of sequence movie that you can move the pieces.
Yeah.
And you got to decide which order is the best order, right?
Yeah. And sometimes that's not necessarily up to me, or sometimes we're all on the same page. And that's why people test screen movies to audiences too, quite a bit, is, you want to see what the audience reacts, because you've been with the movie for so long at that point, it's just in your blood, all the footage by heart, and then you basically show it to a bunch of people that are like, oh, we're going to see a new movie, with Andy Samberg. And then it's just like, you listen to their responses and kind of see, and some of it isn't just listening to them, but just sitting in an audience with them.
So I'm going to ask you go sit in the back of the room after you've edited it. You're often in the gallery for the private screen, and you're reading the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times you want to see when people are moving around, or kind of sometimes checking their phone or anything, because then you're like, oh, the movie's slowing down. We've lost them at that moment. So I think it's an art, watching test screenings and kind of giving a movie to a new audience. It's scary to people for sure.
Yeah.
But after, I don't know, now I've been doing this for close to 20 years. It's I don't mind. I actually can't wait for that point, because that's ultimately why test screenings were put in place, because when the director and the producers weren't seeing eye to eye, they would take it to an unbiased audience, get the reactions, and then kind of haggle over the changes. That's ultimately why test screenings kind of exist.
So you've been in this. You work with 4 different Academy Award-winning editors. You have worked on a Star Wars, which is to many people the pinnacle, but you've got more to do, right? So where does Bradley go from here?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, eventually, maybe I might start making my own movies, but right now I'm just trying to edit more. I want to edit bigger movies, because when you're an assistant, at least the studio structure doesn't really exist as much anymore, where it's you can't work your way up, or once, my mentor retires, I would get popped up. No, that doesn't really exist anymore. So right now it's just kind of you have to basically then start back at the bottom. And I was saying this in the green room, it's if you're a top assistant editor, Like people love you to death, and you get paid a lot. But then if you want to start editing on your own, like you're going to have to take a pay cut sometimes.
Which doesn't seem to make sense. You become the lead editor, but you take a pay cut. Why? Because you're
On
cutting
smaller budget movies. Yeah. Stuff like that.
Oh, interesting. By the way, what are again, people are making their own short films. We had a guest on last week. They were doing those short films where more YouTube content creators are created. What would be some techniques and tips that you could share that say, here's a way to improve your editing skills for your own private projects?
Well, I mean, ultimately what you want to do. That's a great question. I mean, I think ultimately what you learn more about kind of editing but ultimately you don't want to exist. Like when someone watches a movie, they want a movie to get really good reviews and say it's really good performances and like, oh my gosh, look at that cinematography, which just happened on the last movie that I did. And then not mention a single thing about the editing. Like that means you win. That means you succeed. So when people are talking about the editing, I mean, there's certain, action movies where they might, but like for the most part, you don't want people to pull people out of that, out of the story. You want people just to be in there and just watch the movie. And then when the credits roll, just be like, that was great. And that actor was incredible. And, that sort of stuff.
So when people watch a 3-hour movie and they say, wow, that was not 3 hours, you're gold, right? You're like, if I got you to suspend belief and get lost and it didn't feel like 3 hours, you are rock solid.
Yeah. I mean, and that's ultimately what people think is there's no perfect time for a movie, for any movie, but there's a perfect time for the story and the movie that you're making. And so that could be 3 hours. That could be like Lord of the Rings. And you're like, you know what? The extended cut works better than the regular one, and great job. But then there's other ones where it's just like, man, that was a 3-hour movie that could have been a nice hour and 40 minute,
or a 15-minute short.
Yeah. Or a 15-minute short, or that's true. It's like a 40-minute short or a 12-minute short. I mean, it really just depends on what, if the story's being told. I know there's a few things for like shorts where it's like, if you can get it under 12, that's good. If you can get it under 5, that's even better. But it depends on what story you're trying to tell.
What artistic, I mean, you reference being out of sequence and moving around the Groundhog Day, but what other artistic things can you tell us about editing? Because it's not just the director through the lens. You have freedom sometimes to add a artistic twist to how it all plays out, right?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big things that I'm good at and that I was taught through my mentor was, how music and picture work well together. So, temping music in correctly really helps in terms of just like, but there's sometimes some really cool, like hiding edits I think are cool. Sometimes you can hide them on movement. I highly recommend looking into that. Anytime someone like I rarely cut just somebody standing there to somebody standing there, it's just like you want to have some sort of movement.
So if you're talking about movement, you're talking about like moving to this door, and you come through a bedroom, and that bedroom's not connected to that door, but those are those movements.
Yeah, or like I always like looking at footsteps. Like there's a certain like a down step, always cutting on like a foot down step, and then you can cut to another foot down step.
And next thing you know, you're outside in the park.
You're outside. Yeah. So fun ways to do that, I think. In terms of especially like, or if you need to, like if you're cutting a short film and you have like a wide or a medium and you need to go into a close up, like if someone like has their hand moving across their face or something, just cut it like that, or just, I don't know.
So that's not director driven usually. That's usually editor driven, where you pick up on these magical moments that may not have been planned and you go, wait, I can do this and this. And there you have it. Yeah. I've always wondered if that was director driven or not. I'd never been.
I mean, a director, depending on how long you have in post, a director realistically, in the world that we live in with schedules and everything, a director is only going to note things that bug him in the editor's cut, him or her, I should say. So whoever bugs, whoever, those are the notes that you do first. And there's some scenes where you might tear apart and just start from the beginning. But a lot of times what you do stays there because it's working.
Gotcha. Now, Dan's got a question coming in. Do you think you're a better editor because you have done writing? Does it help you?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I mean, the old saying is the writer is the first editor and the editor is the final writer. And that's 100% true. So I think it can be helpful. I think it's sometimes you rewrite ADR a lot. But I think just knowing story and knowing how films work, and I think it's less of me being a writer and more of me growing up at a movie theater and seeing a lot of the stuff and knowing the language. I think just like, okay, at this beat, this is what we're wishing was here, but it wasn't there. And I remember one of the first movies that I edited, we had that, and I sent it to my writer friend, and she was like, no, this beat right here, and is right in terms of like a 3-act structure. It's just the motivation and everything is wrong. And I was like, oh man, how can we tweak that? Where it's just like, yeah. So
you just brought up a term that we often hear if you're into this sort of behind the scenes stuff. You talk about the beat. There's this beat, there's that beat, and we got to have the right beat with it. Can you deconstruct that for people that don't understand the beat of a film? Because it is an important term that you guys understand and work with, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's what exactly is a beat? It depends because there's beats everywhere. It's just a rhythm. It's the rhythm of the overall story. There can be beats in the scene, or it's like, oh, you need that moment, to drag a little bit more. You really want that to stick. But there's totally different beats. It's where, I mean, especially with music hits, you're like, that hit, you really want that hit to hit right there. Like that's where the crescendo should be. It's not always just throwing a track of music down and just being like, okay, that works. But, it's about getting those ups and downs and everything. And I learned how to do that working in reality TV, because reality TV is moved so much by music. Like if you watch The Bachelor, if you watch any reality TV, you'll see there's always music 24/7 going on. And it's trying to tell you how to feel and accent everything. So
I always go back to the first Star Wars. That was the first time I saw the movie, I was just sucked into it. It was like the world didn't exist. I went back a second time and I realized the heroic theme of Luke Skywalker, the Darth Vader march, the Stormtrooper march. And I went back and I went, the music is a character. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole new game. So as an editor, you're not just doing the visual editing, you do also the music score editing after the music score is done, or how's that done?
No, I mean, well, it depends on the budget of the movie, but on like bigger budget movies, there's usually music editors and stuff. Yeah. But as an editor nowadays in 2023, like it's pretty expected for you to have music temped in to your movie, because showing a 2-hour or 3-hour cut to a producer with no music or sound effects is just like you're begging to get fired. But so you have to learn how to be good with music and what's right. And it's okay if it's not always perfect, but you do also want to have some sort of tone to set. So when you give it to a composer, you're like, this is kind of what we're looking at or thinking. And the composer can then use that as a guideline and then build on that.
Have you ever been into a editing situation? And a lot of films do pickups, and some of them are because of bad weather, the actor is out of town, whatever. Have you ever been in the edit bay and you realize we need one little scene? You need to go back because I need that scene to fit right here. And everyone agrees you need an extra scene. Have you ever had that decision as the editor to say, I can't do it without another piece of footage?
Technically, no, you're not supposed to say that. But yes, you can highly recommend that, like, we need something here, or it's missing. There's a big hole here. And it happens rarely that they do extra shooting. Very rarely. The smartest filmmakers, a lot of times in comedies, they'll keep an extra day. They'll try and save a day in the shoot so they can do it later. I had that situation happen on the first, I did a Lifetime movie, and we all agreed there needed to be one more scene, and they were like, okay, we're gonna go out and shoot one more day of pickups for a Lifetime movie. And I was like, great. They didn't realize I cut out a lot of boringness out of the movie. They were just really excited about the cut. So
what has been your personal favorite, whether it's an achievement in our personal film that you just love and you know your soul is in there? What's your personal one?
Well, for me, I mean, obviously I'm proud to work on some of the bigger movies, but I wasn't lead editor on Star Wars and I wasn't, on Palm Springs either. But those movies mean a lot to me. But after I did Star Wars, I did a black and white, like micro budget movie called The Passing Parade. And it was just shot on a Canon. It's a very, very, very small movie, but there was something about it. Like I did it right after I did Star Wars. I worked on this $250 million movie. And then I'm working on a $15,000 black and white movie. And there's something very nice. It just holds a place in my heart. I'm very proud of that.
So which do you consider yourself? Are you an editor or you're a storyteller that happens to edit?
I consider myself a storyteller that's an editor. So, I mean, all editors should be, good storytellers. And that's where, when you get to a level in the industry where you're like, well, it's like everyone that's at a certain level as an editor knows how the software works, knows how to cut, understands the process. It's the next thing that you're doing is you're trying to be that little, angel on the shoulder, maybe devil on the shoulder of like a director. Like you want to be that person who's always looking out for them, trying to help them and guide them in the right direction.
Where would you like to be in 10 years? Again, you've already been for many people, Skywalker and Star Wars and working with J.J. Abrams. Oh my gosh, the list of J.J. films are unbelievable. So Frank Miller, you've already hit the pinnacle with a lot of people. Where do you want to be in 10 years?
I want to be a part of, I guess, an independent film kind of like revolution in terms of like, I feel like, there's all these big budget Hollywood movies that they're making right now are very VFX heavy. And for me, I want to just challenge everyone. I want to go back. I would challenge to try and make movies without VFX. Because one, it's expensive. It's a lot of hassle and every movie has them now. So my thought would be go back to like the 70s and just give people a certain amount of film and you only have this much film and you need to make a movie. Like that sort of thing. That would
be a great reality show. Here you go.
Yeah.
You've all got these cans over here, or you've all got this much videotape, whatever it is. And every week you got this much time and you've got 40 minutes, whatever, 3 hours, you edit it down, but you say you all have this much sound every day. Go create your movie, go create your show, and see who has the best material of the same material.
Yeah, I mean, in 10 years, I'd love to have a studio where I can do that, where it's just like, okay, let's have 10 movies. They're all going to be under $1 million. You have this much film. You can't shoot endlessly. Plan it out and then go make it,
Wow.
And then come back and see how they stack up. So I don't know.
What would be your final advice tonight? We kind of wind down, and again, wonderful conversation, Bradley. This has been great because people don't get to see inside the edit room. They don't get to. One of the interesting things, years ago, I had my little affair with the theater. I knew the theater manager. We had our church there. We were renting the space of the church. So he gave me the promotional reel, the reels, and I cut them up into bookmarkers because our church met at the movie theater. So I literally took the little cells and used a laminator and made a bookmark out of, in fact, one of them was Star Wars. And so we were giving them away as a way to remember the church, the movies. What's the biggest tip you could give somebody to help them launch into one of the biggest important roles of film, but doesn't get front page press very often?
Well, I think the first thing you should do is just start doing it. Teach yourself how to edit, software, edit wedding videos. Just try and edit as much as you can. Learn, do short films, try and make a short film. Because the only way you're going to learn how to do that stuff, is to actually do it. And then if you want to get into it professionally, start learning the software, start watching some videos. I highly recommend going to school if you can. It's a wonderful experience. But even if you can't, I think that there's opportunities now for editing. It's everywhere in our lives. You see people doing social media stuff. You see, people doing YouTube. And one of the things with the pandemic is it opened up this window, which is great because there was always kind of this fallacy that like reality TV, people can't do film or narrative and all this other stuff. When it's behind the scenes, it's all kind of the same in some ways. But what happened is because the pandemic happened, like the industry got kind of crazy. There's a lot of people that retired and just kind of pulled themselves out. So a lot of narrative TV shows started getting all their people from reality TV. So there is a world now where people in reality TV can hop up. Their next step is TV shows, and then it's features, But I also think even further than that, people that do YouTube content too, I think that's kind of the next step, is to try and learn how to make professional YouTube videos, and then you can get a job, in reality TV or move up, maybe you can try and get a narrative job. I did work on a show where the showrunner was trying to hire someone who was recutting stuff on YouTube for them because they were like, this stuff's really impressive. So, it is, it's all kind of open at this point.
Well, and that's great that you kind of land the plane there. I mean, that's what Rock the Stage is all about. We're helping to inspire, to coach, and equip, because this is the new frontier. We have home studios now. We have the software, the technology. I mean, you can shoot a motion picture film on an iPhone now, and it looks really good.
Steven Soderbergh does it.
Yeah, right. So it's great that you bring that up, that really there's nothing holding us back. And YouTube is a free platform. Yeah. And there are people getting seen and heard and picked up. So it's great that you go all the way back to, you can simply start.
Yeah, and
right
I think
there.
In the future, there will be a little bit more of like a through path for some of this stuff. But right now, I think it's just start cutting, just like, you hear kids making movies that come to be directors, or kids that work at movie theaters that end up working on Star Wars. It happens.
From the movie theater, from the popcorn bucket, the Skywalker Ranch. That's gonna be your book when you get it done.
I love it.
Brad McLaughlin, it's been great to have you with us tonight on Rock the Stage Media. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and hopefully we'll get you back on sometime again after you have more awards and more stuff going on.
All right, can't wait. It's a pleasure.
Brad McLaughlin here on Rock the Stage tonight. And by the way, again, you want to check out some of his film. He has worked with some amazing people, whether as an assistant or as the primary editor in Palm Springs, one of those big hits. And again, you do want to check that out, the ACE Award winner film that he was involved with. And again, we're going to be back next week with How the Rock the Stage show, because Audavita Studios makes it all possible with us. Audavita Studios is going to take this show right here. They're going to flip it into an audio podcast, load it up on all the social platforms so you can listen to Rock the Stage in your earbuds and travel with it. I see we have one final question or comment coming on in here from the gallery here tonight. And let's just see. Oh, Daniel's got bonus questions. We will pick that up next week. So, hey, come on back next week. I'm the Trigger Rich Bontrager. Each and every week, 7 o'clock Eastern time, we go live for How the Rock the Stage show. We interview amazing guests to give you better tips how to shine on stage, shine on camera, elevate you and your brand authority, or maybe like tonight, learn a little bit about the inside world of Hollywood. We'll be back next week for How the Rock the Stage live.